This video is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to make sure we can create more content like this, consider supporting us on our Patreon. Thank you. Hi, and welcome to part 2 of chapter 2 of What is Utilitarianism? Actually, it's what utilitarianism is, which is a very important distinction. So this chapter is continuing to flesh out what utilitarianism is and what it isn't. And a lot of that is done by showing points and counterpoints, disagreements with utilitarianism, and clarification of what utilitarianism is actually trying to say, or maybe why that objection is wrong. First, let's talk about nobleness of character. So the utilitarian standard of happiness is not framed around the happiness of the individual per se, but the maximization of happiness across the board or across society. If there is any doubt that nobleness of character makes an individual happier, we can at least say that nobleness of character makes other people happier. And thus, on the aggregate, it maximizes happiness, to which utilitarianism can only attain its end by the general cultivation of the nobleness of character. Happiness in any form cannot be the rational purpose for human life and action. First of all, it is unattainable and unrealistic. And second of all, what right do you have to be happy? What right do you have, even since a short time ago, to even exist? The thing is, men can do without happiness. All noble human beings have felt this, and would have not become noble had they not learned this difficult lesson. This difficult lesson being to elevate virtue above their own personal happiness. Okay, look, even if we were to say this is true, this doesn't cancel out utilitarianism, which is not solely about the pursuit of happiness, but also the mitigation and prevention of unhappiness or suffering. If happiness is unattainable, then it only increases the scope of the need for the mitigation of unhappiness, so as to prevent conditions in which humans don't desire to even exist at all. That being said, the assertion that it is impossible for humans to be happy at all, for human life to at all be pleasant, is a little melodramatic at the very least. Their definition of happiness, in order for that to be true, would have to be something like the highest form of happiness or excitement-oriented happiness that's just constant at a top level, which nobody was really talking about to begin with. The happiness which was meant was not a life of rapture, but moments of such in an existence made up of few and transitory pains, many and various pleasures, with a decided predominance of the active over the passive, and having as the foundation of the whole, not to expect more from life than it is capable of bestowing. A life thus composed, to those who have been fortunate enough to attain it, has always appeared worthy of the name of happiness. And such an existence is even now the lot of many, during some considerable portion of their lives. The present wretched education and wretched social arrangements are the only real hindrance to its being attainable by almost all. But if you're teaching people that the purpose of life is happiness, how are they ever going to feel satisfied when life can only provide a moderate amount of happiness to each person? Aren't you setting us all up for huge disappointment? But great numbers of mankind have already been satisfied with much less. The main constituents of a satisfied life appear to be two, and both of which sufficient for the purpose of happiness. They are tranquility and excitement. With much tranquility, many find that they can be content with very little pleasure. With much excitement, many can reconcile themselves to a considerable quantity of pain. Probably quality too. And there's nothing inherently stopping mankind from achieving both. The two actually serve as natural complements, the fulfillment of one being a preparation and bringing on the natural wish for the other. And why might someone not be satisfied even when they have access to these things? Well, they could have a disease of the mind, or they could have qualities of selfishness or a lack of mental cultivation, as Mill describes. Because to any mind of which the fountains of knowledge have been opened, will find inexhaustible interest in all that surrounds it. Nature, art, poetry, history, the ways of mankind, past and present, and our prospects in the future. There's basically no excuse why anybody born in a civilized society should not gain access to all of these things. As little is there an inherent necessity that any human being should be a selfish egotist, devoid of every feeling or care but those which center in his own miserable individuality. Something far superior to this is sufficiently common even now to give ample earnest of what the human species may be made. Genuine private affections and a sincere interest in the public good are possible, though in unequal degrees, to every rightly brought up human being. In a world in which there is so much to interest, so much to enjoy, and so much also to correct and improve, everyone who has this moderate amount of moral and intellectual requisites is capable of an existence which may be called enviable. And unless such a person, through bad laws or subjection to the will of others, is denied the liberty to use the sources of happiness within his reach, he will not fail to find this enviable existence. So that is, as long as someone is able to escape the evils that surround all of us during our upbringings, so they are able to develop into this fuller, kinder version of themselves. Quite rarely does anybody make it into adulthood while escaping all the kinds of evils that can affect us. Those evils being poverty, disease, or the absence of affection. Fortunately, these are all solvable problems. It might take a long time, though, and many generations to achieve, although it could go faster if desire and knowledge were more widespread. What are we arguing about again? What right do you have to be happy? What right do you even have to exist since a short time ago? Like I said, men can do without happiness. All noble beings have felt this, and they all had to learn this difficult language in the process of becoming noble beings. So what say you there? Well, sure, there are noble people who gave up their own personal happiness for a cause they believed in, a cause they found to be of higher importance than their own happiness. But what kind of causes do those tend to be? Do you think martyrs became martyrs for the cause that everyone else will have to become martyrs as well? Did people take up the burden of noble sacrifice to create a world in which people would always have to give noble sacrifice? Usually this is not what's happening at all. People are usually being noble so that others, like future generations, don't have to be noble. Or at least don't have to be noble the way they were noble. They were hoping to create a world in which no one would have to be in the position they were in the first place. And if they heard of us being in the same exact situation generations later, they wouldn't be happy about it. Though it is only in a very imperfect state of the world's arrangements that anyone can best serve the happiness of others by the absolute sacrifice of his own, yet so long as the world is in that imperfect state, I fully acknowledge that the readiness to make such a sacrifice is the highest virtue which can be found in man. I will add that in this condition of the world, paradoxical as the assertion may be, the conscious ability to do without happiness gives us the best prospect of realizing such happiness as is attainable. For nothing except that consciousness can raise a person above the chances of life, by making him feel, let fate and fortune do their worst, they have not the power to subdue him, which, once felt, frees him from the excess anxiety concerning the evils of life, and enables him to cultivate in tranquility the sources of satisfaction accessible to him, without concerning himself about the uncertainty of their duration any more than about their inevitable end. The utilitarian morality does recognize in human beings the power of sacrificing their own greatest good for the good of others. It only refuses to admit that the sacrifice itself is a good. A sacrifice which does not increase or tend to increase the sum of total happiness, it considers as wasted. The only self-renunciation which it applauds is devotion to the happiness or to some of the means of happiness of others, either of mankind collectively or of individuals within the limits imposed by the collective interests of mankind. And that's going to be our stopping point for today. Again, there's another good chunk left, so it'll actually be 3 parts for this chapter rather than 2. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to our patrons. I actually do know how to pronounce that word, but for some reason, whenever the camera's in front of me, I keep calling these people Patreons, and I don't know why. I only notice when I'm editing. But thank you, patrons. 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 I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and stay tuned. Next week, we will finish up this chapter with part 3. Hey, do you hate all of the ads on our videos? Well, it doesn't have to be this way. There is a way out. We've decided that for every 10 patrons, we will turn off all of the ads on a single book. For example, all the ads on Das Kapital will be turned off. Currently, we're at 7, so if we just get 3 more, we can turn off the ads for an entire book series. And at 20, we'll turn off the ads for another book series. And we will allow our patrons to vote on which book gets its ads turned off. So if that sounds good to you, please consider signing up at our patreon.com/cbchapter.